Welcome to the very, very extremely high level, no, I'm just kidding, the 100 level session on SQL Server 2000 installation. Let me go back up there. I'm Kevin Hill. You already knew that. More than likely, if you don't know me in person, you know me from LinkedIn because this is where you got invited from. There, I'm the overcaffeinated DBA, which is kind of my nickname offline too. That and Dallas Biker because I'm from Dallas and I'm a cyclist. I've been doing SQL Server work for 25 years. I was a dev for like a year and decided I didn't like that and it didn't like me, so I became a DBA. I was the original, not the original. I was an accidental DBA. Now I'm an intentional DBA. DallasDBAs.com. It's my company. We're a huge company. We've got like 4 people, and always with a cup of coffee. Enough about me. The goal for this presentation? I'm not going to read my slide to you. This is for people that want to get better at or learn how to install SQL Server. I'm going with SQL 2022 for a couple reasons. 2025 is not out yet other than private preview, so I can't touch it because I'm not that important. And because this is the most current version of the installer with the choices that have been changing every single version, it seems like we get something else in the installer. So I've done this presentation before on different versions. I want you to see this one. So accidental DBAs, sysadmins, even managers, especially those of you in a small firm where maybe your whole IT staff is 4 people and you don't have a DBA on staff because you've got 1 server or 2, where it doesn't make sense to have a potentially 6-figure salary on staff sitting there doing nothing but hanging out on Twitter all day. X. So anybody that needs to learn more about that's the goal. This is not really a presentation for senior DBAs that have done thousands of installations and do them automated and all that. This is we're going to install 2022 on an Azure VM I've got set up as if it's a production standalone box. It's not going to be clustered. There's no going to be any AGs, nothing super fancy. It's just a base install by my standards. My standards are not necessarily yours, and they're not necessarily what the server would look like in 6 months, but it's a starting point. We're going to go through the entire installer, every screen, not every single link and every single thing, and most of the tabs. I'm probably going to skip the collation tab because it's just to pick a collation that's relevant to your environment and go from there. Jeff Moden, I don't know if he's in here or not, but he gave me the term better practices when he was fussing at me in DMs one day about something because Jeff likes to argue and I argue back. I don't use best practices anymore because they change. Better practices, they're better than what they were yesterday, 5-10 years ago, and that's why we're going with those. Give me just a second here to clean up my screens. I've got a mess. Okay. All right. Once the installation is done, we're going to connect to it with Management Studio. I've got both of them installed already because you didn't want to sit and watch that. It's boring. I've got version 20, which is current, and preview version 21 dot whatever. I don't remember now, but I've got both of those on there just for fun. Standalone installation. This next finish, don't ever do that to your SQL Server. If you blow right through that, hopefully it's because no one has ever done this information for you, but that is going to give you a lot of bad choices along the way that you're going to have to then go correct after the fact and take an outage window to do it. So it's a bad idea. Please don't. I've covered all of this. Those of you that have just recently popped in, if you're not already muted, please mute yourself. And any questions that you have related to this context of a standalone SQL install to get a server started to be a new server in your environment, that's what we're doing. Put those in the Zoom chat, and my moderator, Jeff Miller, is going to send those over to me in Slack as fits where they go. If they don't come up in the middle of the presentation and I don't address them then, we'll do it at the end. Okay. We have a limited amount of time, and I want to be respectful of that. So the machine we're installing on here is this. This is an Azure VM. I don't remember which SKU it is. Don't matter. I've got 4 CPUs. I've got 32 gigs of RAM because it's not doing anything yet. I don't need a lot, and I didn't want to pay extra cost for it. And I've got appropriate disks set up. C drive, D drive, they come with the machine. Got a drive for data, for logs, for tempdb. I've separated all that out, and I don't have a backup drive because 2 reasons. 1, it's a demo box. 2, I generally back up either to an Azure blob storage to URL or to a file share. I try to avoid backing up locally, so I don't even need a local drive. When I touch on backups here, I may send one to that tempdb drive, and I've got a folder there for it, just to have a local one to be able to show if we get to that point. These are all separate managed drives, so they've got their own controller paths and all that, which is really The benefit of separate drive letters is if they have different paths to them, and we'll talk a little bit around that. We may have just talked around that as much as I want to, but they're all premium SSD. So this is a fairly basic, similar looking to what you might want to configure for yourself in Azure and AWS and probably other providers as well. This, I don't remember if this specifically is a memory optimized machine. I believe it is. All that means is the CPU to memory ratio is a little heavier on memory, because SQL Server lives and dies in memory. You know, if you've got just tons and tons of transactions, it doesn't need a lot of CPU. It needs a lot of memory. So, and then disk is like the court jester, king, queen, court jester. The installer, I'm not going to go through everything in here. This is the first thing you see. We're going to go straight to installing. There's a lot of stuff in here that you should be aware of. Things you can download. There's checklists. There's plans on how it do. It's worth stopping and looking at this sometime just to see all the kind of resources that are in here. I'm not going to do that. So that's enough of that. Let's go ahead and get started. I haven't seen any questions, Jeff, so I'm assuming we're all good to go. You can download the executable, the ISO from, if you just search for download SQL Server 2022, I always use the developer edition on that, and that's what we're doing here. If I'm going too fast, got a question on the format value of the drive. 64K block size on the drives used to be much more important than it is now when you had that read-write head moving back and forth. And also the default page allocation is an extent, which is 64. It's 8K pages. So there's some value to it in the SSD days, but probably not a ton. And I'm probably going to start a war with that conversation, but I still do 64. And on an Azure box, if you use their template, they have it set up to use that D drive. There's a certain way you can use that for TempDB, and that is actually, in some of their paperwork, they call it a best practice. Everything on that drive gets blown away and restarted, so there's something in the startup process on that box that then recreates the permissions and the folders and whatnot. I don't know how all that specifically works, because when you use that template to set it up, it's already in there. But I'm a little wary of that. Plus, you got to make sure that your TempDB is never going to go over the size of that D drive. All right, we're going to go straight into the installation now. And you have a couple of different, one thing about this box, I've got this set up as a domain controller as well. Never ever put SQL Server on a domain controller. Let SQL Server live by itself, no other things, so it can have all the resources it needs to do the job. And I'm going to go ahead and turn off my my camera here as well, just to not have bandwidth issues. So we're going to launch straight into a standalone installation here. If I had the cluster stuff, it would be here. You don't do multi-node clusters. You do a single node cluster, then you add a node. Those of you that have been doing this for 20 years, remember the old days where it would do like all 4 nodes at once if it could. All right, so we're going to go into a standalone installation, and I always minimize this because that little box that you saw can hide behind the other one, and you can sit there for 10 minutes waiting for it and it never show up because it's behind something else. Fun with modal windows. Like I said, I'm going to use Developer Edition here. Your other free choices are the evaluation, which time bombs in 180 days, and you can no longer get your data out of there if you were playing with something. And Express has got limitations on everything, CPUs, memory, database size, all that. So they're not useful for me. Developer is exactly the same as Enterprise Edition. You cannot use it for production. That's a hard and fast rule. If you're making business decisions or your customers are seeing it, that's a very loose definition of what production is. If your developers are using it or I'm doing this, perfect for that. If you were doing a production server, you'd want to go ahead and put your key in here, and that key is going to pick whether it's enterprise or standard or web or whatever you want. You can't buy web. That's really for hosts. But for us, we're going to go here. You should read these. There. I hope you read all that. No, honestly, there is information in here that you need to read, and I'm going to say that every time I do this, even though I've read it before. Yes, I did. So I'm going to accept that and move on. That's just your basic install or basic license screen. I don't ever check the box to use Microsoft Update because I don't want that going out and doing all kinds of things outside of SQL Server. But I'm going to uncheck this, and then on the next screen, it's going to look like it did it anyway. All that means is I completed the portion of that, which means I skipped it because the box was unchecked. And it's going to give me two warnings here. The firewall warning you can ignore because all that's saying is that the Windows firewall is turned on. If you want that turned off, that's your security guys, your AD team, whoever makes that call. So, and then this is a domain controller, like I mentioned earlier. Don't do that. I only did it so I could use certain accounts for starting the services and create those so they'd be more what you would be looking for to install of an actual production server. One moment, please. Um, Got a question about application incompatibilities using Azure flavor of the Windows. I have not seen anything like that. Most of the servers I see are still on-prem, bare metal, and VMs because my customers largely that I look at every day are largely still local. It's making a gradual shift, but the only thing I see with Azure VMs is the occasional noisy neighbor situation with somebody else's box or even the customer's other box on the same, on their same host being problematic, or incompatibilities with the drive throughput and the skew of the Azure VM throughput. Moving on to the next thing, let me pay really close attention to what I'm doing here so I can tell you, don't do this. This is just about the worst thing you could do. Select everything just in case you might need it. You're not going to need most of this stuff. When I don't know and someone says, hey, Kevin, go install SQL Server on this new box we put together, SQL 02 or whatever, I'm going to put the database engine in there. Most of the time, I already know the customer well enough. I put replication bits in there just in case because it doesn't turn anything on or off. It just leaves some things enabled. And then I leave everything else out unless they've specifically said you need integration services on this box as well, or whatever. One thing, if you check Polybase, you're going to have 3 databases on your server that you don't even know what they are, and you're going to leave them there forever because you won't know for sure where they came from. And it's going to look like their data warehouse because they start with DW. That's a fun one. So this is my default install, and I don't know any other things. Down here in the bottom, this instance root directory, all that means is where are the SQL Server application source code bits going to go? And they're going to go right there in a very obvious location on the C drive. Nothing else is going to go on the C drive because I don't want it to accidentally fill and crash the box. When Windows has no space left on the C drive, it gets really, really unhappy about it. So go next from here. Let it think about it for a split second or two. Think faster. Those of you that know a named instance, good for you. Windows SQL Server will let you have up to 50 instances on one server. That is a limit, not a goal. The goal is 1. That's my standard. A named instance is simply something where if your box was named SQL 02 and you were putting a SQL instance on there for the sales team, you might give it a name like sales. You might want to just put sales in here. But that does tend to make the connection strings a tad more confusing for people that don't know what a named instance is. I try to keep it to default. MS SQL Server is just the generic name for a default instance. You can only have one default because that's what, but you could have, if you wanted to, you could stack instances. Please don't do that. For sales and shipping and purchasing, they could each have their own, but they're going to all fight for resources, so it's not a great idea. So I'm going to go with the default instance here. And we'll go with next. Otherwise, if you do a named instance, it can't start with a number. You can't call it like 2022. It has to be something like SQL 2022 or sales or shipping or something along those lines. All right, here's the screen why it's important for me to put this on a domain controller. These generic accounts right here, you could go with these. They're reasonably secure. They're local service accounts specific to the machine you're on. But these accounts can't reach out to a URL. They can't do anything outside of the box. And they're well-known accounts. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and change this to something else, browse through. Most of you hopefully have seen this dialog. I'm just going to put in SQL, entire directory, check the names, and you can see that I've got 2. So we're doing the SQL agent here, my SQL agent account. I've got it super tight and locked down to only do certain things that I want the agent doing. And you think I would have had this password somewhere, but I don't. And I turn my agent on to automatic, and that's you're just setting the service to be automatic, manual, or default here, or disabled. Sorry. I can't answer the licensing question on instances. I've heard that the extra instances are free, but I don't know if that's true because I am not a licensing person. Anything I say on camera might come back to bite me, and I don't want that. Any licensing questions, I always say check with your vendor on that, especially since Microsoft does like to change those from time to time. And for here, I'm using a completely different password, except it's exactly the same length. So yeah, for this demo, it's the same thing. Right. It looks like I'm finished with this screen, but I'm not because this checkbox is pretty important. It's kind of hidden. It's below other stuff and it's got a lot of words around it. And the human eye says, I don't want to read all that. When you have a database file and it's in production, it's being used and it's going to grow because some data is coming in, auto grow kicks in if you've got that set and it allocates a gig, 64 megs, some amount of space. Without this box checked, it writes zeros all into all that newly allocated space and then it lets you use it. If you check this box, which you're actually doing, and it says it right below this, you're doing a local security policy to allow that zeroing out process, honestly, to be either skipped or be behind the scenes. I can't remember which. But the space that's been allocated is immediately usable, so your insert statements aren't blocked behind that process. It's a checkbox. You'd have to be in a very, very highly secure, specific environment to zero out or overwrite the space that just got allocated to make sure nothing was seen. I've never encountered an environment like this. Checkbox, you're running this as admin, it's going to be useful 99% of the time. Collations, if you need to change a collation over to your local locale, people in different parts of the world, different languages, of course, that makes sense. Now what? Let's try that again. This isn't going to go very far if I've messed up the passwords. Let's try this one. I know what I did there. Added an extra character. Okay, moving on. Like I said, the collation screen, pick the one you need. Windows authentication mode is great. I'm still going with mixed mode because I'm old, and I like to have an SA account that I can use if I need to. So I'm going to make up a really stupid password here, something like you would use on your luggage. Before I bounce away from this tab, I'm going to add myself to this. I'm Kevin 3NF, third normal form, way back when I was a developer. Because if something happens at the Windows level, or I've fat-fingered this password for SA, I still want to be able to get in as me. And that's just kind of a fail-safe. We've got a lot of tabs to go through here, and these are really basically what we used to do in the old days of configuring after the installation. So, data directories. This is going to give us a chance to change everything. Data root directory, that's going to be for your system. Got the system ones in there, but this is going to be your user databases. All of these are going to change to other drives. The nice thing is you can go in and pick all these drives, and you can make new folders right here on the screen if you need to. SQL data, I've got a folder already there set up with the appropriate permissions, and if it didn't have the permissions, the installer will set them while it's doing the installation. That's kind of cool. It didn't used to do that. All right, so I want the user databases and I want those to be here. They're going to be there, and the system databases are kind of going to be hiding down the normal path. I'm not going to change that because I want system database files to be away from my user database files. That's just me being picky. All right, let's change the log directory over to the log directory I created, and we're going to put the backups. I mentioned this earlier. We're going to put that on the TempDB specifically because I didn't want to pay for an extra backup drive for the month or so I've had this VM and been playing with it. I don't really back up to local drives. If you back up to local drives and somehow ransomware gets in, those local drives could encrypt the backups as well as the data files. And I've dealt with that 4 times now in the last couple of years where everything was trashed and we happened to get lucky and were able to reconstitute the data or pull from an off, a 3-week-old backup or what have you. All right, TempDB. Those of you that are where your SQL experience goes back to 2014 and before, this is new. This came out in 2016, so it's not really new. I guess it's 8 years old now, but for those of us who've been doing it forever. TempDB best practice is to have multiple files to prevent SGAM contention. If you're trying to do it just for load balancing and you don't have that, it'll probably do it, but that's not really what the multiple files was for. Page contention in the system pages that allocate tempdb space when needed. That's what this is solving. Right now, the file's in the wrong place, but because I've got 4 CPUs, Microsoft said 4 files is good for me. And then it defaults in a couple of sizes. If you want to pre-grow them or whatever, you can do that here. This is the data files section. I'm going to remove this and put it in the proper location. Put it in the tempdb folder I created. So that's where they're going to be. I'm going to have 4 of them. And then down here in the log file section for tempdb, notice that it doesn't give you the number of files option because 99% of the time, 1 log file is all you ever need, especially in tempdb. So I'm going to leave that there, and it's going to be in the same location, and that's perfectly fine. Most of the time, edge cases can make that be a different thing. Max degree of parallelism. You're telling SQL Server how many CPUs is the most you can use if you decide a query needs to go parallel. That's the high level of what that means. We're going to pretend that this is a bigger box, and I'm only going to let it use half. So I'm going to take my 4 CPU box, and no query can use more than 2. It's either going to use 1 or 2. It's going to never change. I think if you put option max DOP 4, you could bypass that at the query level. But generically speaking, the database and the system are going to be this. Yes, I have been in a situation where I needed multiple log files because I have a customer that just does really, really wild stuff. And sometimes they blow up their log file. And I need to have them a safety valve for before I can get to it to be able to not take their system down. That's that 1%. I would never recommend it. And we're working on the whole problem that causes all that. Good question, though. So yes, I've been there, but no, I'm not going to belabor it. All right, so max degree of parallelism. This is where you set that. You can change this after the fact without a restart, but if you do, it'll blow out your plan cache and everything will have to recompile. That's not a huge deal necessarily. I would still do it after hours. Same with memory settings. You can do those kind of hot swap, if you will. It's not the right term, but by default, you get this giant normal number, which I believe is, since this is megs, I think that works out to 2 petabytes of memory. I don't have that much. It's telling me, the recommendation is, and this is roughly 75% of the memory on this box. We'll go with that. I could make it much, much higher if I wanted to, because other than the domain controller that shouldn't be there, there's nothing else running on this box, nor will there be. No Java apps, no SSRS, nothing like that. So what I love is that it defaulted to here. I clicked recommended, and now I have to click here to say, yes, I really meant to take the recommendation. Thank you, Microsoft. I love you. Okay. This last tab, I'm not going to get into it too much, although go to my YouTube, and yesterday, the 12th, I actually put up a video on what FileStream does. So I go through a lot of that here. This essentially allows you to store physical files in the file system and lock them through a row in the table that connects the two. It's a pretty cool feature. Don't know if you need it, but storing giant files in the tables is problematic, and that's part of why my other customer needs a secondary log file. But you click some boxes here, you set up a share, et cetera, et cetera. I'm not going to belabor that here because I just don't see it used that often. You can turn it on. It's not going to hurt anything. It's not a service that runs by itself. It's a property of the actual database engine service if you go do it. So why do I have a red X here? Of course. I tried to do a dumb password, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and it didn't like it. Let's see if we're good now. We are. So all that was a whole lot of stuff, a whole lot of choices, many of which we used to have to do after the install and the restart and all that. So I'm going to do this. Get the install going. This is going to take 4 or 5 minutes. So now, Jeff, if you got a couple of stray questions, this would be good time as well. Some things that weren't there and are not in the installer anywhere, and you kind of have to dig for the documentation. Maintenance. If you've ever met me, you know I harp on backups, testing backups by doing restores, check DBs, index maintenance when it's appropriate, statistics updating all the time. No, every day. None of that is is turned on by default out of the box still. If you want to do maintenance within things that are created and supported by Microsoft, which is a valid and noble effort, they give you the option to do a maintenance plans. you drag and drop things and make them happen in a certain order, and it uses the SSIS framework without you having to install SSIS service, and it works, but it's complicated. So it can totally work. Ola Hallengren, Jeff, I don't know if you have him on your list of links that we were talking about, but it'd be great to put on there. Ola Hallengren is not a company, it's a guy, Norway, I think, wrote a thing that basically encompasses all that into something you can run a script, have it installed in like 3 minutes, and then just schedule some jobs and off you go. You're done. So um, that particular set of scripts is widely known, recognized, and supported and used by volunteer DBAs that know it all over the world. So lots of props for Ola doing that and keeping it maintained. And I believe it's up open sourced up on GitHub now, and Eric Darling is helping him manage that. So fantastic tool. It's our default here because maintenance plans can be hard to work with, hard to troubleshoot, and even hard to find the errors in, rather than Ola's free tool that does all that for you with more flexibility and granularity. So it's not technically a best practice. It's my best practice to use Ola because of the ease of getting free support for it, even though it's not a Microsoft product. You call Microsoft for help with an Ola thing, they're probably not going to help you much. But you can get somebody to answer it on Stack Exchange, or already has answered it on Stack Exchange or some other place before you could even talk to a person at Microsoft. So I love them. There are lots of choices. There's third-party products. There's Commvaults. There's all kinds of different ways to do your backups. Index maintenance, stats maintenance, things like that are extremely important as well for performance. If your stats are out of date, your query optimizer doesn't know what to do, and he's going to dramatically over or under allocate things for your queries, and everything's just going to go official term there. All right. So get your maintenance stuff done. And honestly, I'm considering another webinar like this, which is going to be the post-install version. All the things you got to do afterwards. It's not a huge daunting task, but the things you don't know, you don't know. You don't, short of going out and Googling, what do I do now that I've installed SQL Server? Which I really ought to make a blog post titled that. This will be done here pretty quick. I defaulted those system databases, or I allowed the default to stand on this system. It doesn't really matter. I just don't want them on the C drive because TempDB can get out of control. MSDB in some situations can get out of control and fill that C drive. To me, having it in a different directory kind of obfuscates them a little bit from somebody that's just poking around directories and starts to play with things because they're looking for big files to delete. So kind of hide them there, but then I make it real easy for the DBAs to go straight to the database files if they need to. That's why same drive is fine, and they don't get that much traffic. TempDB lives in its own place. I see a lot of servers where TempDB is on the C drive because next install. So I want things separated out logically where I can keep people from finding it and doing something, but also have the right people be able to find what they need quickly, which is the DBA crowd, myself. It's a good question. Thank you for that. Go faster, installer. Used to be we had to go and reconfigure TempDB into multiple files with trace flags and all that. I'm glad those days are gone. Other things that you're going to want to do, set up some jobs, maybe even set up configuring your error logs to roll over every week and keep a certain number. 6 archived ones is the default plus the current one. I like to set it to roll over every week and keep 25, so I've got 6 months worth of error log files. That's just me. If you've got a big log file and you've got a big error log file because you're logging all successful and failed logins, that's going to get out of control in a hurry, and the tools will have a hard time reading through all that. Yes, it looks like everything is green. Everything is green. If it was not, don't blow past this link, because if you've got a failed install, you're going to want to figure out why. Because it's all good, I'm going to blow past that link. All right, now let's just go for broke and close this and see if we can connect to this thing. Management Studio that you're hopefully all familiar with, or at least have heard of. This is the current released version. Database engine. I'm going to browse for it, even though I know it's called SQL 2022. I could browse for network ones to just don't let that go past you. You can do that if you need to. This is a fairly new thing. 3226, Peter Shore. Peter's asking what what trace files I configure as part of my base install, trace flags, not trace files. And 3226, I'm probably saying it wrong now, but that's the one that says log backup was successful. I don't care. If I can take things out of the error log that were supposed to happen, great. I don't want to see information in there as a DBA. I want to see things that didn't work. Log backup failed. I'm going to know about that from the job. All right, so we're going to connect here, and we're going to see that this is a base install. The very first thing I do after this is I go out and grab the current patch level, because this is from 2022. When did that come out? Late 2022, I think. So it's over 2 years old now and riddled with problems. It's got security holes. It's got bug fixes, none of which have been applied in that installer. You've got to go out to Microsoft's site. SQL Server builds.blogspot.com is the greatest source of consolidated list of all the different service packs and CUs and security updates on the planet, or I guess on the internet. I don't think it's a Microsoft official site. It's probably run by a Microsoft person, maybe not. I honestly don't know. But my personal policy is if a CU has been out for a minimum of 2 months, I feel like it's probably okay to install it. Maybe I'm conservative, maybe 3. If it's been out for 2 days, no. I let other people beta test Microsoft CUs because occasionally there's problems, and I want somebody else to have those problems. Microsoft will fix or pull a CU that is known to be bad enough to affect a lot of people. I want to be past that before I install it. Now, if one comes out and that's the thing you need for the fix or the problem you're having, do it, test it. Always test these things and run a load against it, and then go patch the server. Keep up with the security patches, please, because of the prevalence of all the attacks and all the clever ransomware and all the people that still click on links in their email. At least give yourself a fair chance of being protected there. The service accounts that I used when I installed this on that screen, those were super hardcore limited. There are multiple ways to do service accounts. Talk to your Active Directory team about that and get a very limited thing that can do only what's needed. There are articles about proper hardening of SQL servers. There's plenty of them. So do all that stuff, please. So going back to this, system databases, there they are. My favorite little hack to know how long the server's been up, I look at the create date of TimDB. That's easier than running a query for me. So because I'm lazy. I do this all the time. I want to look at something, I close it, I have to go open it back up. The files are in the right places. At the instance level properties, my database settings, compress backup should be checked. That's not in the installer. There's no reason I could think of. I'm sure there's an edge case somewhere. Why would you not compress your backups by default? That way, if somebody comes in and runs, backup database, my 5 terabyte database, 2 disk equals whatever, I want it compressed by default. Not everybody's going to know they need to put with compression in there. Uncompressed ad hoc backups happen all the time, and that can blow out your drive, whatever drive it lands on. And check the backup checksum too. That's just a little bit making sure that it's a solid file and it's restorable. You never know it's restorable until you go actually do a test restore. Please do that. These are all the directories that we picked. What else is in here? Memory, that's what we chose. That's good. Advanced settings, the max DOP is 2. That's what we picked. So this is all good. I always change that to 50 when I don't know what the machine is going to be used for. 5 is too small. Cost threshold for parallelism, and this is a post-install configuration thing. You can do it live. That is the mark at which a query might be considered to use parallelism, going through multiple CPUs. The optimizer makes that decision. He may see that he's got a 200 cost query and he runs in through one because something in the code told him to, or confused him and told him to. Query optimizer is a guy. I call him Optimus. But the cost threshold for parallelism of 5 is making some very, very simple queries potentially go through multiple processors, therefore hogging threads, and that's not really what you want on a production server. If it's highly transactional and every transaction is going to be a cost of 1 or 0.1, great. Most people are doing that, plus they're also doing some reporting and some more complicated queries that are going to be over that 50 cliff. So there's a number in there that is right for your server and your workload. 50 is a generic. Some people use 100, some people use 25. I landed on 50 a long time ago and haven't burned by it. So that's kind of where I live. I'm not going to go into the rest of the stuff that's in here because we're at 40 minutes past the hour, and I want to open this up to some of the questions that y'all submitted when you registered. Not everybody had that opportunity, but there were some things about automation of installation. There is a way to do that through INI files, and I think there's even a way you can create an INI file through the installer, or I may be imagining that. If you're going to build a whole bunch of SQL servers and they have to be to a corporate standard, that is what you want to do, is run the installer from the command line and specify your INI file, and it just does all that for you. All those boxes we just checked and whatnot. It's going to push all that out, and that's going to be your standard. If you're doing them one or two, it may not be worth the effort of going through that. Security and hardening, tighten everything down. Give your SA account a password and disable it. If the SA is disabled, jobs and databases owned by SA will still work. Better yet, disable it and make a new one called like printer or something like that. Make that be a sysadmin if you need a SQL login that has sysadmin rights. Check your sysadmins. If you've got more than about 5, I question what's going on in your environment. That may be legit. Probably not. And yes, I made up the number 5. I ran across one the other day, had 30. And some of those people didn't even work there anymore. So that was kind of fun. Performance optimization in 2025. No, I don't know anything about 2025 yet. HADR, I recommend both. I'm not going to go through them in this, but you do need to understand that they are different things. High availability is about keeping you online. Disaster recovery is about being able to come back and with as little data loss as possible. RPO and RTO. Okay. Trace flags, already went through that one. Do you find a system database on the same drive? We already did that. Remote dedicated admin connection. Yes, I always turn that on. What the documentation will tell you, when your server is frozen, it's not down, the services are running, but nobody, apps can't get in, individual users can't get in. There's a back door. If you've turned that on, that you can get in with admin : server name, I don't know the exact syntax, and that will let you slide in and maybe kill off some queries or do some stuff as a DBA. You need to know that exists, and you need to have the rights to be able to use that connection, but I do turn that on. It also gives you a couple of other things that some queries, some troubleshooting tools, I'm thinking specifically of Eric Darling's SP pressure detector. That gives you more information when it can use that dedicated admin connection. I don't know why in his code he's doing that, but he is. So that's yeah. It's a checkbox, yes or no. And if nobody knows how to use it, then it's not going to hurt you any. But really, it was designed to be just a backdoor to get in and fix a system that's frozen. Okay, other questions? I'm not seeing Jeff put anything in or typing. Jeff, I don't know if you've been sending out the list of links like we did, but I think that's all I've got for you today. The install itself is fairly basic. It takes a lot longer, quote unquote, a lot longer than it used to because you have a lot more choices now, but that's a good thing. It's not where it needs to be yet, along with also some of just the straight up defaults period, like that cost threshold. Those aren't where they need to be at for most users. And the reason for that, I'm beating up on Microsoft, but I want to be nice to them as well. Microsoft has to make a product that can be installed on a 4 CPU box from 2006 that's still running spinning disks. If they ramp everything up to today's hardware, some other older hardware is not going to be able to run it, and that makes them look really, really bad. So, that's the official reason some of this stuff is slowly coming along and following behind today's hardware. Some of you are probably aware that when SSDs came out, that was a game changer. 2016 was a complete and total rewrite of the database engine to be able to take advantage of more modern hardware, but still have compatibility level settings for older code and previous versions of the engine as well. That was probably the biggest rewrite since 2005. Have I used the Microsoft Marketplace image in Azure? I'm assuming that means some version of Windows and some version of SQL Server. Yes, many times, but only in my dev environment. Um, for my work at Dallas DBAs and my clients, they generally, the few that are in the cloud, maybe 10, 20%, uh, they'll tell me what they need. And more often than not, they've already gone out and bought keys if it's a new box. So I'm going to be doing a straight install there with their specific key. Um, I do have one that I'm working with right now that is using, I don't know how they built it, but they're using SQL Server monthly licensing in their Azure spend, and they're just buying their licenses by the month. And I'm about to cut their core count from 32 to 16, or possibly even 8, which will completely pay for our cost to them, what they're paying me, because it's enterprise, and their CPUs are much better behaved than they were when I met them a month ago. Uh, I don't have any additional thoughts on changing the installation or config on those, other than just making sure that there's separation and there's proper drive sizing tied to it, which is not necessarily part of the install, but you should be adding managed drives when you're building a virtual machine. And please don't anybody ask me about AWS. I just don't spend any time there, other than knowing some things about AWS RDS for SQL Server has a weird thing as far as what you can change and what you can't at the system level, instance level, like that cost threshold. You have to go through a couple extra, jump through some hoops to do that. That's all I've got. If there's nothing else, I'm going to thank you all for your time. And I'm going to take a quick glance at the chat. Yeah, Peter, yikes. Says, yikes, pay as you go for SQL Server licenses. Yes. Guys, everybody, I very much appreciate your coming to this and listening to me yammer on for 45 minutes. I hope you learned something from it. We did record this, so if that went well, we'll have a recording available. You should get a thank you message from the Luma link you signed up at. If you have any other questions, you can tag me in them on LinkedIn. You can send me a direct message if we're connected. Follow me, whatever. Um, I'm pretty easy to find on LinkedIn, I think. Yeah, that's all I've got. Take care, everyone.